The second common issue to be aware of is the highest and best use of the residue property is different than the highest and best use before the taking. Eminent domain valuation requires an estimate of value of the whole property before the taking and an estimate of value of what's left of the whole after the taking, that's known as the residue, to determine if damages exist. When the waiver valuation is used, that's the value analysis report, someone competent in the determination of valuation problems has determined there's no adverse effects to the residue due to the taking. This means it's apparent there's no damages to the residue and that it's an uncomplicated valuation problem. And to do a full before and after valuation would waste taxpayer money and would not result in a more meaningful estimate of compensation. In many instances, if the highest and best use of the residue remains the same as the whole before the taking, it's apparent there's no damages to the residue. On the other hand, if the highest and best use of the residue is different, or if the intensity of that highest and best use is different, there is a greater likelihood of damages. That's why the value analysis should not be used when the highest and best use of the residue is different than the highest and best use of the whole. Issues that can affect the highest and best use of the residue are the residue is smaller in size and the effect of this detrimentally makes it different than the whole. The residue no longer complies with the zoning code. Parking is reduced, detrimentally affecting the building on the site. On-site septic systems are impacted by the taking, again, adversely affecting the occupation of the building that's on the property. Existing access is reduced, detrimentally affecting the residue property. The proposed right-of-way limits are moved closer to the structures, detrimentally affecting the residue. There's a change in shape or configuration of the residue. We're going to illustrate some of these issues with some examples. All right, so we've got a retail building sitting on a commercial site. There's 12 parking spaces abutting the road frontage. And we have a WD taking that impacts the parking, obviously. What is the highest, is the highest and best use of the residue different than the whole property? Well, all parking's been eliminated. The site size has been reduced approximately 15%. There are impacts to the building because all parking has been eliminated. We need research into zoning because we need to find out, is it nonconformance to size? Is it nonconformance to setbacks and parking regulations? Or does the property become a legal nonconforming use? Or to be used, will the property have to be brought up to current standards or torn down and redeveloped to comply with the code? So damages are apparent from multiple levels. Only minimal parking can possibly be reestablished on the residue property, and the building suffers a reduction in intensity of use. This is a complex valuation problem because the residue property suffers a detrimental change in the intensity of highest and best use. This is not a waiver valuation problem. All right, here's the next example. We got a single-family house situated on a site, got a septic system with its leach field to the front of the property and a well at the side yard. And we have a WD taking. And that WD taking is obviously hitting the septic system. Is the highest and best use of the residue different than the whole property? Well, the septic system is severed and rendered not functional. There's a reduction in site size. Research and zoning is needed to determine what nonconformances are to setback and size requirements. Proximity to the road may be an issue. May be insufficient area to reestablish a septic system because a septic system cannot be too close to a well. Damages are apparent from multiple levels. The septic system is not functional. The house cannot be occupied until a new system is restored at a significant cost to cure. And if a new system can't be established, the structure may need to be demolished so the site can be redeveloped. The intensity of use may have changed from existing use as a single-family home to a single-family home site, less demolition costs. This is a complex valuation problem because the residue property suffers a detrimental change in intensity of highest and best use. Not a waiver valuation problem. All right, the value analysis report is appropriate when there is no change in the highest and best use or the intensity of highest and best use between the whole property before the taking and the residue property after the taking. Other considerations that can bend the rules. In rare instances, there can be a change in highest and best use between the whole and the residue, but there is no difference in value. However, one cannot simply state there's no difference in value. It must be analyzed and determined to be reasonable. Generally, that analysis creates a complex valuation problem to determine there's no change in value as a result in change of highest and best use. If confronted with this situation, one should call the acquiring agency for guidance. And two, sometimes a minor cost to cure may be considered in the value analysis report. A cost to cure is a cost to minimize damages to the residue due to the severance of the taking from the whole property. In most situations, damages must be established before a cost to cure can be used. That requires a before and after valuation, and such a cost must be proven to be feasible. That means there has to be a separate analysis that compares the cost of the cure compared against the damages that are proven. This requires a before and after valuation. There are instances where it's obvious that a very minor cost to cure is needed to correct something on the residue to restore its function or its highest and best use. Examples are restore fencing so livestock doesn't escape into the highway, or reestablish a small part of the drive so the owner can access the garage. Such costs to cure are considered reasonable as they restore the highest and best use of the residue, so there is no change in use between the whole property and the residue. When such a cost to cure is obvious and it's minor, it may be included as part of the compensation estimate in the value analysis report. That compensation estimate, including any minor cost to cure, cannot exceed the $10,000 threshold established in regulation. All right, it is time for a knowledge check.